All right, everybody, welcome back. We're here with Chris LaGarde. We have another interview podcast for you here today. So, Chris, before we get started with a couple of our questions, I'd love it if you could just introduce yourself for our audience.
Absolutely. I've been in the business. I'm 44 years old. I've been married about 20 years last month, have 4 kids ranging from 16 down to 6. Been in the business. Real estate was probably my second or third career, but I've been in the business since 2006, full-time since 2007, started my own team in 2010. I'm actually a MAPS coach, been a MAPS coach for 3.5 years, also a KWU Approved Trainer for 3.5 years. Love KW, love the culture that it offers, and I'm also a national leader with the Social Equity Task Force. So been part of that since June of 2020. I have a team that I run part-time. We closed 213 transactions last year for about 75 million. Dude, we were like 50 grand off of, we missed 2 million in revenue by 50 grand. I was so upset.
Pretty good.
Not that it's all about the numbers. It was just like, that's kind of a nice thing to be able to say we hit 2 million in revenue. But I lead that part-time and I coach part-time technically. Right.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, that gives me definitely a good, second of their career, MAPS, KW Approved Trainer, you got your team and everything. So I guess the question, so you kind of started with this. I want to go back a little bit here. You said real estate was sort of like a second, third career. So, and you got started, you said about 2006, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So what was it before that? What'd you kind of do before that?
Absolutely. So very quickly, I was a C average student in high school. So art was my favorite. I did really well with art. And so I ended up going, really the only opportunity. I applied to a couple schools, didn't get in. Really the only option for me was art school. So I went to the Art Institute of Philadelphia, got a 2-year degree in graphic web design, worked for a few companies, and worked for myself a little bit. Really enjoyed working for myself instead of having somebody tell me what to do. My second career was related. I did some user interface design for some smart home companies at the time. This was before iPads were a thing. And then, I ended up working for a company out of Boston. I live in Coatesville, Pennsylvania, and worked for them for about a year out of my basement. And at that point, I had a friend who was like, hey, you should invest in real estate. So I got my license thinking I would invest, went to the market center for some training, ended up meeting our OP, Cindy Dickerman, who's amazing. If you don't know her, you should. Ended up joining her team with a small salary, thankfully, which you'll hear in a minute why that's thankful, but doing marketing. So I was her marketing person, and then a buyer's agent. So I had a small salary, covered, I don't know, mortgage and groceries. And at the time, at 2006, we had just had our first child, my wife and I, and we had bought our first home 2 years before that. So we were kind of right in the mix of family at that point.
The amount of times I've heard real estate agents who have now been fairly successful real estate agents say they got into the business kind of through the investing lens first. And it was, that's sort of the money and the lifestyle of that, the passive income and things like that draws you. And then kind of the activities of real estate entice you to stay. So I guess the question I'll have there is, you joined with Cindy Dickerman, who I recognize her name. We had her daughter actually speak at an event of ours back in May. Why Keller Williams? Were they just the big player in your area, or did you interview with any other brokerages first? Did you have a relationship with Cindy? How did that come about with kind of the KW angle in real estate?
Yeah, so it was KW. The friend that was encouraging me to invest was with KW, and he wasn't an agent. He invested. And he had, I don't know how many units by that point, but I think the last I spoke to him maybe 4 or 5 years ago, he had like 40 or 45 units that he managed. No, I think he had actually hired a property management company to work for him. To do it for him. However, he was with KW, and so I really only interviewed there. And honestly, what really drew it to me, this may come out in our conversation, but my spiritual side, my faith side is really important to me, and God, family, business resonated greatly with me. And so I was like, all right, if that's what they state, then I think that's good. I'll run with that. So it was really that simple.
Yeah. So as a friend had an affiliation, and then the affiliation happened to align with who you are. And so it was just sort of a why question it if it's working out this way. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So you started on the team, small salary, working more in the market. I can obviously see from your graphic design, that background, that's where you came into it. What was the transition like? You're on the team, you're sort of doing marketing. Were you doing sales right off the bat, or were you just marketing? And then how'd you kind of make that transition into sales and then really kind of running with that?
Yeah, man. I remember saying like not too long before I got in full time to a friend, I never want to do sales. So it's funny. One of the things I like to make sure I tell people when I do a training or whatever, it's like, look, I'm an SC on the disc. I'm an Enneagram 5, if anybody knows the Enneagram, and so you look at those personality types, and I'm not a natural salesperson, right? I'm task oriented. My some of my friends like to joke I don't like people, which is not true, but I need my quality alone time, right? So I sucked at real estate. I really, the first couple of years there were bills we didn't pay. We had our second child in 2008, and I remember that was probably one of the hardest times of my marriage and my life because we weren't making ends meet. We our second child, I love him. He was our more difficult one. Was colicky and didn't sleep through the night. And so my wife and I were like ships passing in the night. And at that point, I actually had somebody kind of steal on the team I was on. I don't want to say steal a client, but it wasn't handled very well. And I was expecting to work with them, and I was working with them. And, I got a small referral fee for it. And it was really upsetting, especially at a time when money was short. So, yeah, first couple of years, I just didn't really know what to do. Ignite wasn't a thing yet. The market center was doing what they could to get people into, sales, and Cindy was busy, so it was hard. The first couple of years were really, really hard.
Yeah. So two things in that are very similar. I'm also an SC on the disc.
Okay. Okay.
That's what made tech a pretty easy one for me in the market center. And I will 100% agree. I was the second child, and my mom said I was the one that she really regretted that
Oh gosh.
how this was going to go. So yeah, I
Yeah.
get that. So let's talk because you kind of went through a little bit of maybe that commission or referral was a learning opportunity, but I want to go kind of a pro and a con here. So what was something maybe early on, a success you had early on that maybe gave you a little fuel to keep it moving and say like, I think I can make something of it. And then also on the flip side, what was something that might've been a failure or an opportunity for growth early on that said, you know what, that really hindered me a little early on. So what was something good that happened? What was something maybe a little bit failure oriented that happened?
So I'm going to start with a negative.
Okay.
Part of my, I'm really big into self-awareness and understanding who you are. And I didn't realize it real clearly at the time, but my biggest negative self-talk is I'm not good enough. So everything kind of comes back down to that. And man, if you're in sales, especially as a buyer's agent, and you're like, I remember doing like buyer consultations or whatever, and just being like desperate, like really wanting them to like me, because if they didn't like me, if they didn't hire me, that was like a reflection on my self-worth, which is not a healthy place to be. And the truth is it's not, right? Whether somebody chooses you or not is not a reflection of your self-worth and identity. It just, could be a lot of different things. But for me at that time, it was. And so, my failure when I look back is like, man, and I really think providentially, I believe in God, and I really think that this was His plan. Looking back, there was a person he pictured me to be, he intended me to be, and he it was a matter of getting me to that point. He used real estate to do that because, like I said, for the first couple of years, I was not good. It was all about my self-worth and whether I was good enough, and I wasn't. I wasn't good enough, and part of that was because of my self-awareness. So the win, honestly, was taking Bold in 2009. Bold changed my life. I
Mm.
took it with Michael Ann Byerly. I love her. She's has been such a great coach and Bold coach. I have so much respect for her, and I remember finishing, like, that taught me how to sell. That taught me how to understand like what my negative self-talk really was and start to identify it, become self-aware of what was going on in my head. And I look at self-awareness as that skill or ability between stimulation and response, right? Between those two things, like if something's happening, you have the ability to step back, observe, well, what am I thinking about this? How am I thinking? What are my thoughts? What am I saying to myself? What am I believing about myself? And the more Gary said this, I'm going to fortunate enough to be in his top agent group. And in the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, he's really been on a tear to make sure everybody understands self-awareness more than anything will determine how you show up and succeed, quote unquote, in this world. And so, the more self-aware you can be, the better. And so Bold really helped me to become self-aware. And it also gave me the practical skills of how to sell, talking to 20 people a day, tracking my numbers, scripts. I hated scripts. Authenticity is one of my top values for me. And I felt like scripts were so inauthentic. But the truth is, at this point, once you internalize, and we all have scripts, we all use scripts. Hey, how you doing? How was your morning? How was your weekend? Whatever. Those are all scripts. And when scripts are really just helping us to learn how to speak to people in a high level, right? So once I internalized scripts, it really was a game changer for me. And like even now with my coaching clients, I haven't sold a home personally in four years, but they're still embedded. They're still here. It's an unconscious competence, just flows right out. So
Yeah. So I love all that. There's a lot there. I have two kind of things I want to break through, and I want to stay a little bit on this idea of your identity. So there are a lot of agents that get into real estate, and they are bringing with them, whether consciously or subconsciously, an identity that they've created over time. And then you get into real estate, and you're right. You go to Bold, you go to Ignite, you learn scripts, you learn this is the way you kind of need to now interact, whether you were an introvert, an extrovert, or whatever. There's sort of this polishing, and there can be some maybe natural resistance to that, right? You kind of said, I never thought of myself as a sales agent, and then you go off and become a sales agent, right? And so talk just a little bit more about sort of that transition you have to go through. And I always akin it to almost you're always on the hunt a little bit to kill your old self in a way. And I don't mean that to be morbid,
yes.
but right, like you have to shed your old skin to grow into your new person. So talk to me a little bit about what it was like for you kind of getting into a field maybe that you didn't originally see yourself into, but what did you have to do to change internally in order to make the most of it?
Well, first, let me just say, I look at it as your true self versus your false self, right? And we're always looking to let go of our false self, identify it, let go of it, and pursue our true self. And I think there's two different worldviews, period, right? And all other worldviews are kind of subjugated to these two worldviews. The first one is the separated or scarce worldview, right? And that's self-interest, that's being perfect, that's there isn't enough to go around, so to speak. And so that's the scarce worldview. Then you have the connected or abundant worldview, which is about there's more than enough. It's okay to be imperfect. We need to be connected, so it's like for the greater good, so to speak. And so when you look at those two things, like my opinion is we should always be pursuing those your true self, which comes from a connected worldview, versus the false self, which comes from a separated worldview. And so what the question was, what was my journey like when I first began, and how did I come to really understand that? Was that what you were asking? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, exactly. No, you're right on it.
Yeah. So it started with Bold. It actually started before that. A little bit. I was watching a cartoon with one of my kids called A Snoodle's Tale, and it was about this character who is born into this village, and everybody else, he's got these gifts, right? And everybody else around him, he tries to use his gifts of painting and music and flying, and everybody makes him, calls him stupid. And they basically paint these pictures of how he looks stupid, puts him in his backpack, which weighs him down. At the time, in 2008, 2009, identified greatly with that. I felt that was me. I had all these things that were weighing me down, these false beliefs about myself. And this character leaves this town, goes up to this mountain, meets this God figure. And the God figure's like, who told you these things? Like, that's not you. And he takes those images, those pictures out of his backpack, throws them in the fire. And then he says, this is how I see you. And he reveals this amazing big picture that the Snoodle ends up saying, I'd love to believe it, but I'm afraid to. And there's all these quotes about how like our greatest self or what we're true potential, like we're really afraid of that. And I think that was true. And so for me, that started me on a journey of, I was depressed in my early 20s before I got into real estate. And it actually started then because I'd started to go to therapy and see a counselor and things like that. And that's how I kind of developed my initial skills of self-awareness. But as I got into real estate, coaching was really important. Having somebody next to me, which let's be honest, coaching or counseling and therapy really is a coach in a lot of ways. It's just more of a mental focused coach. And so, I had always had coaches around me, and Bold started that. Michael Ann, I knew, was a little too harsh for me. I wasn't ready for her. Like if I had hired her, I like to joke with her and say I would have ended up in a corner, like twitching and like just not functioning because I just wouldn't have been able to handle her. So ended up hiring a non-real estate coach just to kind of coach me on life and my mindset for a year and a half. And it made a huge difference for me. And so I had that coach with me for about 18 months, and we would meet weekly and go through books, go through various things and he really, like, we talk about like my experience of life, and he'd really nail me on like those things that I'd be saying about myself that were not true, and help me to understand how I'm not good enough. Really was impacting how I showed up, not only for my business, but for my family. And so it was interesting because in that time when I took Bold in 2009, and as I was hiring that coach, I had this vision of creating a team. And I went to a friend of mine who we were doing some accountability with numbers. I took Bold, then he took Bold. He was on his mom's team, and I was on Cindy's team. And we decided that he was going to leave his mom's team and do his own thing anyway. And I was like, why don't we try and do some things together? And we just we did that for about 12 and a half years. We did the team together, and it was an amazing experience. But as I formed that, I just got a bigger and bigger vision of who I was, and one brick on top of another. Honestly, over the last 12 and a half, 13 years, like I'm still in that journey. But it was having a coach, being committed, as Tony Robbins talks about, constant, never ending improvement. Honestly, being humble enough to understand I don't have it all figured out. I don't have it all together, and allowing somebody to speak into my life in such a way that uh, it was hard to hear sometimes. I didn't want to acknowledge it. Um, but ultimately, it was some things that were holding me back, and allowed me to kind of surge forward in various ways. So,
Yeah, and there's something you said that was great. I don't even want to come back and try and nitpick any of that. There's one thing that you said, a response before that kind of you just tailed into it there. This idea of a cue and response. Now, Atomic Habits, books like that, Bullseye, things like that. They talk about this a lot, right? There are cues and there are responses that we have ingrained in us subconsciously, and there's ones that we're a little bit more conscious of. As you start getting into this, there is such a coming to call into question, the lenses in which you have viewed the world so far, whether you're the way you view other people and the world and the work, the way you view yourself, right? It's the constant, I use the same Tony Robbins algorithms a lot too, which is you have the woman, the old woman, right? And the young woman kind of in the same picture. And two people are looking at the same image, and it's just sort of what they take from it. So I think that adding that self-awareness piece, the more you can grow that, the better you are at separating those cues and responses. Would you kind of agree with that? I mean, has that kind of been true for you, that as your self-awareness has grown, as you've gone through counseling, as you've gone through reading, as you've gone through coaching, right? As you've gone through just pure business experience, have you gotten better at separating the cue and response? And have you gotten better at making a more, kind of how you are and who you are first, right? And then the why, and we're going to get into your why here in a second. But has that been helpful in kind of separating those two, to have that self-awareness?
yes, yeah, I'd like to think that. Yeah, I hope I've gotten better. I think I have. And there's seasons for me. I recognize patterns where there's like, to be completely honest, the last year has been probably one of the hardest years business wise for me. A lot of things happening I won't go into, but it really caused me to question who I was, right? I thought I was this leader. I thought I was this coach, and some things weren't working there. I really, there was a period there where I didn't want to get on coaching calls with my clients. I just didn't enjoy it, because I doubted who I was, and some things that happened caused me to shake my foundation. And so, but before that, like there's iterations, right? And I think there's patterns, there's cycles that we go through in life where we just like we talk about in Bold and career visioning, right? It's a we grow, then we hit a ceiling of achievement, we kind of level off for a while. And before this past year, I definitely was kind of leveled off. I was like, all right, I'm comfortable, I'm good with where I'm at. And then something happened, and it caused me like to really be in a season of darkness, of wilderness. And I really had to go back to my faith and really understanding like what am I really believing about myself, about the world, about who I am. And luckily, like I found some really amazing people to connect with, and some things, and have grown in the last 12 months quite tremendously. And I feel like now I'm back on this trajectory where I'm growing I'm in a season of growth personally, where I'm much more self-aware of, even like certainty is one of those things of the scarce worldview, of the separate worldview. Like you need to have certainty. And let's be honest, yeah, there's really nothing we can be certain of. We don't really control anything. almost, except for really our mindset and maybe some of our actions. And so certainty for me was really important leading up to this current season. And I've learned to let go of it. There's a mystery to life that you've got to be okay with. And even to the point where, look, as a coach, like I think it's important to look at 3 years out, 5 years out, 10 years, like where do you want to be? Where do you want to go? But let's be honest, how much of that do we really control? And Gary has said, and I agree with him because I heard a pastor say something very similar, that really your dreams and goals in the future are really just about who you need to show up as and how you need to grow right now. That's really all it's about. Whether you achieve that or not is secondary. It's really about who do you need to become, who do you want to become, and who are you naturally? Like, what are those gifts and skills, talents that need to be released in you, that should be released according to your true self, right? That the false self might be holding back, like fear, shame, guilt. All of those things kill our ability to live our true self, and um, fear is one of the biggest killers of joy. And when we don't have joy, we can't be creative, we can't grow, right? And so it's like wherever fear is, we've got to like let go of some of that. And so one of the things that I've really, a habit, right, that you mentioned, um, I love this quote that Gary talks about in the one thing. People don't decide their futures; they decide their habits, and their habits decide their futures, right? And you know, from my perspective, if God rested on the seventh day, if He took time off, we need to take time off, and that's one thing. Like I'm endeavoring to change in real estate is like, look, guys, the way we use our time is not healthy. And there's a really good book that I'll just share with you guys called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. And what it taught me was that the way I was living my life was not healthy. And so I've started to have a habit of daily, weekly, quarterly, having some silence and solitude, you know, more than I was even before, and just being purposeful in that. And man, what that does for your soul is absolutely amazing. And being self-aware, it allows you to observe your thoughts. And I started journaling, which I've resisted for years. And it's just really important to be able to observe your thoughts, whether it's journaling or some other habit, really helps with those things. So,
Yeah.
sorry,
For
I tend to
anybody,
go
for
long sometimes.
no, that and that's why I wanted to kind of expound a little bit here on there. But you know, for anybody that's a Hal Elrod Miracle Morning person, you know, I always say, look, if the word meditation makes you feel a little funny, I just call it practicing silence, right? And there
Amen.
is a little bit
That's
of
right.
that, just let the brain calm, be aware of the thoughts that are kind of flowing in your river and just acknowledge what they are. You don't have to tell them to change. You just acknowledge
That's
what
right.
they are and just be
That's
reflective of
right.
that. I want to come back because I love to ask the question, what's your why? But I think you had brought up a good point on this. And I'd love for you to kind of explain a little bit of your reasoning on how you like to put this word before that one, and then maybe what's your answer. But you were
Yeah.
sort of saying you got to figure out, you know, who you are first.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can figure out what your why is. And I love that kind of putting that cart before the horse or whatever you want to call it. But talk me through a little bit about, you know, why you feel that way, why it's first
Yeah.
important to figure out who you are, and then the why will start to come after that.
So I've been trying to understand my big why for years, right? I know my mission statement is that I exist to help others find, create, and pass on abundant life, right? I have a longer version I won't share here, but for time's sake, but like that's like my purpose in a nutshell. And yet, like, okay, well, what's my like? That's my purpose, but that's not my why. And I feel like if we don't understand who we are, the gifts, skills, talents, you know, I like to say, look, you know, if you were to imagine unconditional love coming to you, right? I don't care what our faith is, what you believe. I think we can all agree that unconditional love is the highest power that there is. And so if you could imagine unconditional love coming to you, taking your fears, your shame, your guilt, your concern, and like destroying them, and then giving you back like who you are, like just taking time in your mindfulness to imagine that, you know, taking that and applying that to your world around you, I think will help you understand what your why is, because it's another great book that I'll share with you guys. I keep a lot of books around me for coaching. It's called Beyond Entrepreneurship 2.0 by Jim Collins. He wrote Good to Great. This book preceded Good to Great, by the way, although he just updated it last year. And he talks about the vision of a company. And I think this applies to us as people as well. It's comprised of your core values, your purpose, and then your mission, right? Core values are pretty self-explanatory. Your purpose is why you exist, and then your mission is like your purpose is like that never changes, right? That's like, you know, my abundant life. I exist to help others find, create, pass on abundant life. But you know, your mission has a horizon. It might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, you know, but he says it has a horizon, has an end. And once you accomplish that, then you move on to your next mission. And you know, that's kind of like the why, like the purpose and the why. The purpose and the mission are the why, and your core values or who you are will inform. He talks about that informing your purpose and your mission. If you try to put your mission and your purpose before your core values, it's going to be out of alignment. And so that's kind of how I look at it, is like when you understand, there's tons of personality profiles out there. I love the Enneagram because it goes into like, how do you show up in a healthy way? How do you show up in a negative way? And it talks about addresses how your false self impacts your ability to live at the highest level. But Enneagram, Strengths Finders, KPA, DISC, all of those things give us a window into who we are and how we show up. And once we're aware of those things, then we can make a choice as to whether the way we're showing up is serving us or not serving us, and we can choose to show up that way or not show up that way anymore, or at least work on it from a habit standpoint. So I think when you understand the gift, skills, talents, your unique makeup, how you show up to things, you can then move on to, okay, well, why am I doing what I'm doing, right? Because if you don't know your makeup, then you could be trying to climb you're climbing the wrong ladder, right? The worst thing I could imagine would be working your entire life, climbing this ladder and getting to the top and realizing it's the wrong ladder. So I start with me and my identity. Who am I? Then I apply that to the world around me, because the truth is from a connected worldview, we need each other. You bring gifts and skills, talents that I don't bring. I bring I bring stuff that you don't bring. The people listening bring skills, gifts, talents that I can't bring. And if we are missing each other, we're not going to have that deep impact. It's like there's enough out there unless we hoard things, which includes our gifts, skills, and talents, right? So if we understand what that is, then we can apply it to our why. Then we can all work in harmony and symmetry and go after, what it is that we're all supposed to go after together. So.
Yeah, I think so many times I've sat with people, whether it's in a vision board class or whether it's a what's your why class or just talking about it. And so many people sort of regurgitate whys, like they're something to be bought off a store shelf. Like there are these prepackaged whys for different people to get. And I think if you ever find yourself doing that, come back to these, right? The skills, your talents, kind of that start with those core parts of you, then let it develop naturally. I think that's a really good tactic for somebody if they're struggling a little bit, because there's a lot of people that say, oh, I don't know what it is, or it's changed, or this or that. So we have our last 3 minutes here, and I kind of want to ask you, I love asking this question to everybody here. It sounds like I kind of know where we're going to go with this, but I'm curious to see. Let's say you have 2 children, you said?
4.
4 children. Okay, 4 children. You had 2 from 06 to, so you have 4 children, and when they're 8, let's say they're 18, and you can pass on nothing to them. No money, no assets, no houses, nothing. The only thing you can literally give them all is just one piece of advice. And you hope that one piece of advice, it's not going to be the whole pie, but it's just your most driving piece that you could give somebody at 18. What would that look like for you?
All right, so it's hopefully this isn't too religious for folks, but I'll use the non-religious terminology for it, which is like, understand who and what unconditional love is, and understand who and what unconditional love says you are. Because the truth is if you seek that, everything else will fall into place. I truly believe that, and I have a 16-year-old, and I've been thinking a lot about the next 2 summers, because they're probably the last 2 summers he'll be living in my house that I'll have with him. And so it's like, out of everything, like, you can give people the world, money or whatever, but if you help them understand who they are and, who and what unconditional love is, and make that their driving force, man, can you imagine what the world would be like? Goodness gracious, it would be so different than what we see today. So that would be the one thing that I would say.
I love that. And so we got about 90 seconds here. Is there anything that you got going on? What's next for you? What's next for you going on? And if people were to kind of look you up, what are some of the things you got going on forward?
Yeah, that's a great hot ones question, Sean Evans. So here's what I would say is there's if you're, I don't know when this is going to air, probably after Mega Camp, but there is an event that I'm helping to host with a group of friends at Mega Camp on Sunday night and Monday morning about identity. And so, if you know of anybody, that is Connor, that would be there, that would be at Mega Camp, that would be interested in attending this event, I would love for you to share that with them. But honestly, like, for me right now, it's, if anybody, if the identity conversation has resonated with anybody, I'd love to connect with them. Obviously you'll be sharing my information, but there's a great book out there called Living Fearless by a friend of mine named Jamie Winship. And it's a wonderful book on helping you understand your identity, exchanging the false worldview for a connected worldview. And so, that's what I'm really passionate about at the moment, is really helping people to understand that and really live in that true self manner. So.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording here just in a second, but I appreciate you being on today. And there goes my timer stopping us right on time. But guys, if you have any questions for Chris, we'll be sure to put his information here and everything. You guys can reach out to him. And if you see him at Mega Camp, you see him at your next event, come up and talk about identity, right?
Absolutely. Thank you,
That's it.
Connor.
All right. Thanks so much.